Good evening, everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes for people to enter, and then we will get started. For those of you that are just entering, we'll get started in about a minute. We're just waiting for everybody to flow in. There we go. It's about 6 o'clock. So why don't we get started? And for those of us that are joining a little bit late, they can catch up with us. So hello, and welcome to one of today's Tiger Alumni Week webinars, Galapagos Islands, Tortoises, Lizards, and Penguins, oh my. I'm Ron Goldberg, Senior Director of Reunion and Affinity Programs at RIT and your moderator. Before I introduce our speaker, there are a few housekeeping points I want to go over. All attendees have joined in mute mode. However, your questions can be entered in the Q&A box at any time throughout the discussion. We will make every effort to address all your comments and questions throughout the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and made available in the upcoming weeks. A communication with how to access the recording will be sent out and also posted on our website. If you have any technical questions, please feel free to type those into the Q&A box, and we will do our best to get you the appropriate answers. We would like to thank our premier sponsor, Sharp Notions, as well as our Tiger sponsor, Rochester Regional Health, for making sure this week's programming was possible. We also would like to thank our Access Services team for helping us to make the webinars accessible for all of our alumni. Real-time captioning is available within the webinar, and our interpreters will be spotlighted during the presentation. The pandemic has had a major impact on everyone, including our students. We thank all of our alumni and friends for the support you have given to our students during these uncertain times. If you're interested in supporting or continuing your support, make sure to mark your calendars for this year's War Day, which we held this Wednesday. We will have giving challenges, an alumni scavenger hunt, and more. So please consider making a gift to support students who need it now more than ever. Can't wait for War Day? You can make a gift right now by visiting rit.edu/roar. And your gift will be counted towards the War Day total and help RIT achieve its $1.5 million goal. Now, on to our session. We're pleased to welcome Bob Rothman as he talks about the Galapagos Islands. Dr. Rothman's early interest in vertebrate paleontology, natural history, and evolution led him to pursue a BA in paleontology. In graduate school, he became interested in genetics and molecular biology, and was eventually hired by RIT to get their new biotechnology program up and running. In 1989, Bob had the opportunity to visit the Galapagos as a tourist and was so entranced by the experience that he developed a field course that has allowed him to return year after year with students. This course is one of the very first and longest running study abroad programs that RIT offers. Dr. Rothman has recently completed a book, A Paradise for Reptiles, Lizards, Snakes, and Giant Tortoises of the Galapagos Islands. Bob, thank you for joining us. The audience is all yours.
Thank you, Ron. As Ron said, I had the opportunity to go to the Galapagos in 1989, and it was probably the most adrenaline-laden experience I've ever had. And I resolved I got to come back, and it would be great to bring students. Had it not been for COVID, I would have just been back from my 32nd trip to the islands. And over the time, I have no idea how many students and faculty and staff and others that I've brought with me. Now, we do this as a course, and the course meets regularly throughout the semester, and then at the end of the course, we go. There is so much to think about and see in the Galapagos that we can just barely get through it in the course of the semester. So a 30-minute webinar is very challenging. So think of yourself as going to a big fancy restaurant, but only being able to order the sample menu, and that's what we'll be doing. So I'll try to give you some of the basic overview of the Galapagos and some of the cool things you see. So first, a little bit about the islands and how they got there. The islands are a small, represent a small cluster of islands. There are about 13, 15 of them, depending on how big you or how small you consider an island. They are right here. They straddle the equator. They're about 600 miles out in the Pacific, and the islands are owned by Ecuador. They are located, their formation is a function of plate tectonics, continental drift. So they are located right on the very edge of the Nazca plate, right here, right almost on top of the spreading center between the Cocos plate and the Nazca plate. But and so the islands are constantly moving. They're drifting slowly to the southeast. As they drift, they pass over what is called a thermal hotspot. It's a plume of very hot mantle material that rises up from the Earth's core, and as it hits the surface, it burns a hole through the lithosphere and creates an island. Of course, the plate is moving, so eventually the island moves off of the hotspot, volcanism dies, and the islands are now subject to erosion. But in the place where the first island was located, there's now a second island, which is growing, but it eventually will also move off the hotspot to create a third island and a fourth island. And hence you end up with this archipelago. The hotspot is considered to be right in this area. And these two islands, Isabella and Fernandina, are very young, less than 1 million years old. Way off to the southeast, San Cristobal and Española are maybe 3 to 4 million years old. And there is evidence of islands even farther out that have sunk below the waves and were originally much older. In many places in the Galapagos, the geology is very bare. This is a spot called Bartolomé, and it's a highlight of any trip. You can see how raw the volcanism is. People who go here say, wow, I feel like I've been to the moon or to Mars. And in other places, you can see very fresh lava flows. This particular lava flow formed just about at the beginning of the 20th century. But way over on the older part of the island, you see a lava flow like this, which has all been oxidized and broken up. So this lava flow is maybe 500 to 1,000 years old. So you see these changes. You can see these changes in age as you go from island to island. We in 2018 we did an alumni trip to the Galapagos. I'll tell you more about that at the end. And we had the amazing good fortune to witness an eruption. So our boat was out not too far away, as I'll show you in a moment, and you can see a fire fountain and a crater that this fire fountain is building. And you can see lava flow coming out, and it's eventually working its way up to the water. And this is the view very close up. Now it looks like these are just very small streams, but lava, as hot as you think it is just barely hot enough to stay molten. So what happens is that the surface tends to solidify and it insulates the flow below. So even though this just looks like all black lava here, this is just a crust of solidified lava, and there's molten lava flowing all under here, and these streams that you see are essentially breakups as the lava is flowing into the ocean. This is one of our part of our group that year, and you can see how close we got. It was an amazing experience to see this, and as common as eruptions are, I've rarely gotten to see them. So this was a really exciting event for our group. Now, a little bit about how the islands were discovered. The islands were discovered in connection with the Spanish conquest of the Incas in Peru. So Francisco Pizarro marched with a small band of conquistadores into the Andes and met up with Atahualpa, the ruler of the Incas. And they came from the Spanish point of view at a really good time, because the Inca had just within days completed a very bloody civil war. So the empire was already weakened. Pizarro came and professed he was coming in peace, but he very treacherously the next day captured Atahualpa, held him for ransom, and eventually murdered him. Now, once the conquistadors had the Incas firmly in control, they started to argue amongst themselves. Francisco Pizarro and Diego Almagro. Almagro was second in command of the conquistadors, started arguing over spoils. And the arguing was so intense that it got back to the king. So the king decided to send an emissary to see if he could sort out the problem. And as emissary, he chose Tomas de Berlanga, who was the Bishop of Panama. He asked Berlanga to proceed to Peru and try to come to some agreement between Pizarro and Almagro, and also to report back on how the conquistadores were treating the indigenous people. So he duly got into a ship at Nombre de Dios in Panama, which was the main Spanish town there. And he meant to sail along the coast down to Lima. But, sorry, I got a twitchy mouse finger. But as he got down towards the equator, the winds died, and powerful currents carried him off to the west. And they were out for a very long time. They were dying. They were running out of water. Ultimately, 10 horses and 1 sailor died, but they found that they were saved when they saw these islands. So they sent a boat out to look for water. They were very disappointed, and the islands are very, very dry. And eventually they were forced to squeezing juice out of cactus plants in order to survive. And so when he finally made it back to Lima, he sent a letter to the king describing his misadventure. And as part of it, he described these islands. And specifically, he sent out some people to explore the islands, and he wrote, "Sino lobos marinos y tortugas y Galápagos tan grandes que llevaba cada uno un hombre encina y muchos iguanas que son como sierpes." Translated, nothing but sea lions and turtles and tortoises so big that each one could carry a man on his back, and many iguanas that are like serpents. And you can see Galapagos there. That was the Spanish term for tortoise, and that ultimately became the name of the islands. Their experience was so terrible that Berlanga presented a very grim and dire view of the islands. He said, "But on the whole island, I do not think there is a place where one might sow a bushel of corn, because most of it is full of very, very big stones, so much so that it seems as though God had showered stones, and the earth here is like dross, worthless, because it has not the power of raising a little grass, but only some thistles." This description was so terrible that basically nobody went there. And for 300 years, the islands were more or less deserted with one exception. It turned out that it was a great hideout for pirates, who English pirates, having entered into the Pacific, would sail up and down the coast of South America, raiding Spanish towns, preying on Spanish galleons, and then they would go out to the Galapagos to hide. And there a lot of pirate artifacts have been found, and there are always rumors of buried pirate treasure, although nobody's ever found any. Once the pirate age was over, whalers started to enter the archipelago, because the waters off the Galapagos are very rich whaling grounds. And while they were cruising for whales, they were also hunting tortoises, because tortoises provided a very easily obtainable source of fresh food. On top of that, other ships would visit for the same purpose. And once the California gold rush got underway, people would come to the Galapagos to collect tortoises to take back to San Francisco to sell to this burgeoning population of 49ers. So all of this activity, and as we'll talk about later, severely reduced the population tortoises. Several of them are extinct now. Of all the people to visit the Galapagos, Charles Darwin is probably the most important, and the islands are certainly most closely associated with Darwin. They're often referred to as Darwin's laboratory of evolution, and what he saw there provided seminal data for his thinking on the origin of species. Darwin was he's generally said to be the naturalist on the HMS Beagle, which was on a trip to map the coast of east and west coasts of South America. He was really there to be the captain's companion, but he became the de facto naturalist, and the goal was to map the coast of South America and then do a circumnavigation. And once the Beagle left South America, their first port of call was the Galapagos. The Galapagos was very important commercially because of the whaling industry, and so there was interest in having maps there. Darwin reached the Galapagos in 1835, which was pretty much towards the end of his trip. And basically everything that he had seen in South America prepared him for what he was going to encounter in the Galapagos. Many of the people who visited the Galapagos before Darwin wrote accounts of the Galapagos, but Darwin wrote the first scientific report about the Galapagos. And in the second edition of the Voyage of the Beagle, you can see many of his ideas developing on evolution, particularly in the Galapagos. But at that point, he was not really being very open about it. It wouldn't be another 20 years until he actually published The Origin of Species. Everywhere that you go in the Galapagos, you often encounter things that Darwin saw. For example, this is a very famous spot called Kicker Rock. I found this illustration in one of Darwin's more technical books that most people don't know. It was on volcanic islands that were visited by the Galapagos. And I had been looking for this book for some time, and I finally found a copy about 2 weeks after a Galapagos trip. And as I was thumbing through it, I found this picture. And I had been there just 2 weeks earlier. There is now a research station that was inaugurated to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Origin of Species. And it is known as the Charles Darwin Scientific Research Station, Estación Científica Charles Darwin. This is my last group of Galapagos students. And there are various places around the archipelago that you can visit to pay homage to Darwin. Now, there are two ways to visit the Galapagos. You can charter a yacht and cruise around the islands, or you can do a land tour. The islands are inhabited. There are three major towns, Puerto Bacarrizzo, Puerto Ayora, and Puerto Villamil. And you can take speedboats from island to island, stay in the towns, and then do day trips from those towns, either by bus or by boat to other nearby islands. So what do you see? Well, for one thing, you know that in the same place where you see flamingos and penguins, and it's not a zoo, it's going to be a pretty interesting place. This is the Galapagos penguin. It's an endemic species. It's the second smallest penguin in the world. You're also going to see a lot of seabirds that you would many of which you would expect, like pelicans. This is a common brown pelican, same pelican that we see in the northern hemisphere, although it is considered to be an endemic Galapagos subspecies. What's great about the Galapagos is animals are not afraid of you, and you can get very close to them, and you can see all kinds of behaviors and activities that you would never see if you go to any of the national parks around here or anywhere in the States. So pelicans are plunge divers. And if you watch them dive, you'll see that when they've completed their dive, they'll hold their heads in the water for just a moment because their pouches are filled with water, and they have to get rid of the water before they can swallow the fish. So it's not uncommon to find birds like this. These are called brown noddies that will harass the pelican and hopefully, quite frequently be able to steal a fish. But more than that, you can see lots of the intimate lives of animals. So you can see courtship and mating. You can see chick rearing. So this is a pelican that is very newly hatched, probably 2 days old, and these are somewhat older pelicans. As you would expect, there are seagulls in the Galapagos, but they're endemic species found only in the Galapagos. One of them is the lava gull, so-called obviously because of its color. If you see them on the black lava rocks and then you turn away for a moment and look back, it's very difficult to find them again. They are not particularly common, and generally you see them around here and there. The other endemic seagull is the swallowtail gull, a very beautiful bird, very common in the islands. It is the only seagull in the world that fishes at night. And if you are on a yacht cruise, you'll often see them following the boats as the boat is churning up the water and bringing stuff up to the surface for them to feed on. And like the pelicans, you can see lots of different parts of their natural history and lives. So once again, it's mating. A warning: you can't go to the Galapagos and be a prude, because you see all kinds of courtship behavior. Swallowtail gulls will lay one single egg directly on the ground. Both parents care for the birds. This is a fairly young chick, and this is a juvenile. It's hard to believe that those are the same species of bird. There are 3 boobies in the Galapagos. There is the Nazca Booby, the red-footed booby, and the blue-footed booby. If you'd like to see them again, there is the Nazca Booby, the red-footed booby, and the blue-footed booby. And if you want to see them again, yet again, there's the Nazca Booby, the red-footed booby, and the blue-footed booby. Now, the boobies have very different mating and chick rearing strategies. Like pelicans, they're related to pelicans. Like pelicans, they're plunge divers, but they have a very different dive. You can see this flock that is fishing, and you can see all the different phases of the dive. This bird is going straight down, and you can see at the very last moment, they'll kind of fold themselves into an arrow and cut into the water with barely making a splash, unlike the big clumsy splashes that you see with pelicans. Now, in terms of their courtship, the Nazca boobies will, when they're courting, the males will build this little kind of token nest. You can see he's standing on a little pile of stones and twigs, and as a female comes walking by, he will perform what's called a sky point, where the beak, the wings, and the tail are all tipped to the sky and let out a whistle. And if the display is attractive, then the female will mate. Nazca boobies lay 2 eggs about 5 days apart, and consequently, the chick from the first egg is going to be much bigger than the sibling. So here you see the first chick and an egg ready to hatch. The problem is that Nazca boobies can only raise 1 chick. So one of the chicks are going to die. So they practice a phenomenon called siblicide, in which if the first chick survives, it will forcibly push the younger chick out of the nesting area and leave it to die. If the first chick dies, then the second chick is the backup chick. The red-footed booby will actually build a nest. Will actually build a nest in the bushes. And it turns out that there are actually two morphs, two forms of red-footed booby. There is the brown morph and the red morph. Red-footed boobies are distributed all across the tropics, and most people in other parts of the world would see the white morph as as what they would recognize as a red-footed booby. The brown morph is about 5% of the population, but in the Galapagos, that's switched. In the Galapagos, the brown morph is the predominant form, but the white morph is only about 5%. Again, as different as these animals look, they're the same species, and it's not uncommon to see them courting and mating together or sharing a nest together. The red-footed booby lays one egg and raises one chick. And again, both parents will participate in rearing the chick. Then there's the blue-footed booby. The blue-footed booby has the most complicated courtship behavior of all and has a completely different strategy for raising chicks. So the blue-footed boobies will parade around each other with this very high, very slow, high step. You can see the one right here is got his feet up, foot down, foot up, foot down, and as the display heats up, the birds will sky point to each other. And again, the beak is tipped up, the wings are tipped up, and the tail is tipped up. This is the most dramatic sky point of all the boobies. And if you know anything about bird anatomy, you would understand that this bird is basically turning its wings inside out. And there is another view of it. And again, like the other birds, you can see all aspects of their life, from mating to egg laying to chick raising. So here you see a blue-footed booby with 2 eggs. Sometimes they lay 3 eggs, and if in a good season, they can actually raise all 3 chicks. Like the Nazca boobies, they nest on the ground, but as the egg develops, the boobies will walk back and forth in a circle, dropping guano and creating these white rings, and that's what defines their nesting area. Another common bird that you see in the Galapagos, another common seabird, is the frigate bird. Male frigate birds have this patch of red skin on their throat, which over a period of about a half an hour, they can pump up into this big red balloon. And they will sit in the bushes, usually several males together. It's when males display together, it's called lekking, L-E-K-I-N-G. And they will sit there in the bushes and displaying their big red throat pouches. And when a female flies over, they will start wagging their head and fluttering their wings and calling. And again, if this is satisfactory, then the female will land and they will mate. The frigate birds lay 1 egg. Takes about 1.5 years for the chick to grow, and both parents will take care of the chick. Now, yet another bird. This one is an endemic. It's a very unusual bird. It's a flightless cormorant. It's a very small population. They're only on the westernmost islands. Among cormorants, the flightless cormorant is the largest cormorant, but as you can see, it has very tiny wings and very scraggly feathers. To give you an idea of how small those wings are, this is a comparison with a double-crested cormorant, which genetically is a cormorant most closely related to the Galapagos cormorants. Looking at the skeletons of these birds is very interesting. On the left, this is the Galapagos flightless cormorant, And here is the double-crested cormorant. You can see that the Galapagos cormorant is overall physically much bigger, but look at its wings compared to the double crest. Also, what's interesting is look at the hind legs of the flightless cormorant compared to the double-crested. All of the weight and power in the flightless bird, because they don't have to fly, is focused on the hindquarters of the bird, which makes them very powerful swimmers. I was snorkeling one time, and there was one in the water right next to me, and when it dived, it accidentally kicked me in the shoulder, and it hurt. The other interesting piece on the skeleton, if you look at the breastplate on the double-crested cormorant, there's a big keel on the breastplate, which is where all of the powerful flight muscles attach. On the flightless cormorant, you can see that it's just a little tiny nub. And as I said, these powerful hind legs make the flightless cormorant very powerful swimmers. And they will dive looking for squid and octopus and small fish. There is a dove in the Galapagos dove. And if it looks familiar to you in general, it's because it's closely related to the northern mourning dove that we see all around Rochester. If there's a dove, then of course there's going to be a hawk. And there is a Galapagos hawk. Again, an endemic species. Now, the birds that most people would typically hear about are the Darwin Finches. And there are 15, 16 species of them. I have seen most of the ones that it's possible to see. Now, when you look at these birds, you want to focus on the key differences. So you can see that they're different colors. But the brown and kind of mottled sparrow-like plumage is a function of sex or age. Those are either females or juveniles. Adult males, like this one here, are black. Their beaks are different colors because it's a question of whether they're in breeding condition or not. If they're in breeding condition, then their beaks are black. If they're between breeding season, then they're yellow. So what you want to look at is the shape of the beak. I'm just going to point out five. So these three are known as ground finches: small ground finch, medium ground finch, large ground finch. And look at the beak: small, medium, large. There are three cactus finches: the common cactus finch and the large cactus finch. Again, look at the beak shapes. They're very different, and they are adapted for feeding on different kinds of foods. Darwin himself did not call them Darwin finches. That came later. He understood they were important, but he didn't really understand them. They're very difficult genetically to understand. He was more impressed with mockingbirds because there are only 4 species of mockingbird, 3 of which you see on the screen. I've seen the 4th one, but only from a distance. They're very difficult to see because they're on islands where people can't go. Yet the three mockingbirds that I have shown you here are physically very different. Behaviorally, they're somewhat different. Darwin was very intrigued by them because he couldn't understand why there would be so many mockingbirds when any one mockingbird could do equally well on any island. This was one of the key observations that he made in the Galapagos. Then there are more mundane things, sea lions. I don't particularly like sea lions, not because there's a problem with them, but everybody else tends to kind of go get silly over sea lions. I think they should look at finches when everybody wants to play with sea lions. But the sea lions in the Galapagos are an endemic species that are very closely related to the California sea lion. They're smaller than the California sea lion, and every time I see a California sea lion, I'm always startled at how big it is compared to what I'm used to in the Galapagos. And of course, for me, what is really intriguing are the iguanas and the reptiles. So there are 2 basic basic types of iguana: the land iguana and the marine iguana. This is a land iguana, and they tend to live in the drier parts of the archipelago, and they feed on a variety of things, but they're particularly fond of cactus, and they will eat the cactus, pretty much whole, the spines and all. What they particularly love are the yellow flowers on the cactus plants. They're not particularly nutritious, but an iguana will travel farther to eat a fallen yellow flower than to eat a more nutritious cactus pad that's closer by. Then, of course, there is the marine iguana. It's very difficult to miss marine iguanas. The land iguanas, you don't see that often because they're a little bit more inland, but the marine iguanas are all along the shore, and they tend to mass in huge colonies. And true to their name, they swim. You see them in the water all the time, and if you're in the right place at the right time, you can actually see them feeding underwater. Marine iguanas are the only lizard that feeds underwater. If you go to the Galapagos at different times of the year, you see different things, different behaviors. So that big pileup of iguanas that I just showed you, like that, that's in the non-breeding part of the year, and they'll just cluster all over the rocks and all over each other. But during the breeding season in January and February, they become strictly territorial, and it's possible to see fights between marine iguanas, which involve in head-butting contests, and you might even see copulation. Again, you can't be a prude and go to the Galapagos. I find marine iguanas to be endlessly fascinating, and every time I come back, my wife asks me, "So, have you taken enough pictures of marine iguanas?" And my answer is always, "Can you ever?" Now, another reptile that most people tend to dismiss, even in the historical literature, they're dismissed because they basically look like little lizards, and people don't notice them that much. They're called lava lizards. To me, if any animal deserves to be called Darwin's, I think it should be the Darwin lava lizards. There are 10 different species of them, 7 of which you can see. The other 3 are on islands you can't visit, and these are 3 of them. On the left are the males, and the right are the females. And what's interesting about them is genetically, each island has its own unique species. Not only that, but it's possible to find genetically related lizards on the mainland. So the lava lizards show exactly what makes exactly the case that Darwin was trying to make with the giant tortoises, which he didn't see enough of, and didn't have enough samples of, or the finches, which were too complex to understand. So I think lava lizards are incredibly important. Then, of course, there's the giant tortoise. The tortoises are divided up into 2 basic morphologies. There is a so-called dome-shaped tortoise and the saddleback tortoise. Saddleback tortoises tend to live in the drier coastal areas, whereas the dome tortoises tend to live up in the highlands. In the highlands, there's lots of vegetation on the ground, and the tortoises mostly graze. In the lowlands, most of what the tortoises eat are above their head, and that arch over the shell allows them to lift their heads up to browse. Like the lava lizards, each island has its own unique species, some of which are domed, and some of which are saddleback. So here and here and here are saddlebacks. Here's a saddleback. Here's a saddleback, and the rest are domed. On Isabella, the big island, each of the volcanoes has its own unique species. giant tortoises have an interesting what do I want to say? They have an interesting aggressive display, and the saddleback tortoises are more aggressive than the dome tortoises. So this is an encounter between two male tortoises at the Darwin Research Station, and you can see, and their competition is that each tortoise is trying to raise his head higher than the other. And the one on the left, you can see, has managed to get up a little bit higher, and the one on the right is the loser. So he will very quickly draw his head down into his shell, kind of collapse down onto the ground, and slowly walk away. No trip to the Galapagos would be complete without snorkeling, and some of the snorkeling is really amazing in the Galapagos. These are just a handful of things that you'll see. Here are sea anemones, pufferfish, surgeonfish. It's very common to have sea lions swimming in the water with you, and they're very curious and playful. If you're lucky, you'll get to swim. You can swim with sea turtles, and as I said, if you're in the right place at the right time, you can even swim with marine iguanas. And if you want something a little bit more adrenaline laden, there are other interesting fish to hold your interest. So Darwin, as I say, the Galapagos were very important to Darwin in helping him develop his ideas about evolution. In his journal in 1837, so this would be about a year after he got back from the voyage, he wrote, "Had been greatly struck from about month of previous March on character of South American fossils and species on Galapagos archipelago. These facts, the origin, especially the latter, in other words, the Galapagos, of all my views." In 1859, he wrote a letter to Alfred Russel Wallace, who also came up with the idea of evolution by natural selection. And in his letter, he told him the geographical distribution and geological relations of extinct to recent inhabitants of South America first led me to the subject, especially the case of the Galapagos Islands. So Darwin was struck by the raw geology that he saw, and he was struck by the number of endemic species that he saw. But not only that they were endemic, but having traveled extensively through South America, he realized, at least in a general way, that the plants and animals that he saw in the Galapagos were very similar, but not the same as plants and animals on the mainland. And he referred to the Galapagos as a group of satellites attached to America. And he wrote, "Considering the small size of these islands, we feel the more astonished at the number of their aboriginal beings and at their confined range. Seeing every height crowned with its crater and the boundaries of most of the lava streams still distinct, we are led to believe that within a period most geologically recent, the unbroken ocean was here spread out. Hence, both in space and time, we seem to be brought somewhat near to that great fact, that mystery of mysteries, the first appearance of new beings on this earth." So with that, we come to the conclusion of our tasting menu. And I think we have a few, if you would like more information, we were supposed to go to the Galapagos this past May, but that was canceled because of COVID. And we were originally planning another student trip next May, but because of the uncertainties around COVID, we decided not to do that. But we are planning a 2022 trip, both a student trip and an alumni trip. If you would like to be on a mailing list or want more information about the trips, feel free to contact me at robert.rothman@rit.edu. And with that, I think we probably have a couple of minutes for questions.
Yeah, so Bob, we have a question from Julie. She said or asked, being on the equator, is the weather/temperature the same most of the year? And therefore, are there seasons for animals?
There is a wet season and a dry season. Yeah, so it is different, and the animals do different behaviors in different parts of the year. So as I said, when we were talking about the marine iguanas, you can see courtship and territorial display January, February, March, April. You can see nesting. The rest of the year, not. So yes, there are some differences from one season to another, but the big climatic difference is wet versus dry. The wet is not all that wet, but it does make a difference.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Just give it 1 minute and see if we have any other questions. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. Well, Bob, I think you wowed them so much that at this point they either really want to go and they know it all, or you know, they're not sure what to ask at this point. So so at this point, you know, thanks, Bob, for sharing your expertise with our alumni and
thank
friends.
You all for joining me.
And thank you everyone for joining us at home. As I mentioned, we'll send out information on how to access the recording in the near future. Also, don't forget to make your Roar Day gift by clicking the link in the chat. Lastly, if you're not already connected to the RIT Alumni Association's social media channels, we encourage you to do so. Those links can also be found in the chat box. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of Tiger Alumni Week. Thanks, Bob. Have a great night.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to the interpreters and captionists. Thanks.
Thanks.